I'm Kent Myers.
I'm Mick Cornett, and it's time for the verdict.
As a part of its traditional and continuing commitment to public and community service, Crowe and Dunleavy Law Firm presents The Verdict, an objective discussion of contemporary legal issues hosted by Kent Myers. And also brought to you by a friend of Oklahoma Lawyers for Children and Delta Dental Plan of Oklahoma. And welcome to The Verdict. I'm Mick Cornett, and let me quickly introduce my co-host and one of Oklahoma's top legal experts, Kent Myers.
Well, 2 days before Christmas, here we are talking about taxes. Now, there's something Grinchy about that, I think.
There certainly is.
But we promised the viewers we'd do it, and we just try to fulfill our promises. Last show, we talked about the governor's tax reform plan that would, in essence, repeal the individual income tax and substitute for it a sales tax on services. We promised the viewers that we'd get into the details, which Jim Walker last week said that the devil was in the details, and we'll get a chance to see if that's true today, because we'll try to talk about some of the details of that tax program. It is a 5.9% tax on services. It covers a lot of things, and there are some things that aren't covered, and that's really the purpose today, is to talk about those included and excluded services and get specific. But here we are 2 days before Christmas, and it's hard to think about anything but Santa, and we may talk more about that later as well.
All right, we have two outstanding guests who you'll meet in our next segment. It's part two of our discussion concerning the governor's tax proposal. What do you think? You're watching The Verdict with Mick Cornett and Kent Myers.
The Journal-Record is pleased to be a sponsor of The Verdict. The Journal-Record, since 1903, the best source of Oklahoma business news and legal information.
I enrich our cultural landscape.
I help define our quality of life.
I am one of 4,000 artists in central Oklahoma who receive
support from Allied Arts, this community's united arts organization.
I am an allied artist.
In Oklahoma, there are more than 1,600 children waiting to be adopted. They're of all ages, and for many, home has been a source of pain and conflict. They've dreamed of finding a better life and a loving family. Consider adoption. For more information, call 1-877-OK-SWIFT or visit the website www.okdhs.org. Adopt. It may be the toughest job you'll ever love.
And Blankenship has stopped at the line of scrimmage. No gain on the play. Keating at 4th and 7 on the Tiger 4th and 6-yard line. 38 seconds on the clock. The Tigers have no choice but to go. Wiggins in to do the kicking. Here's the snap. And the kick is away.
All children deserve a life of hope and love, but sometimes they experience a life of pain, neglect, and abuse.
When that happens, each child deserves all of the quality assistance and representation that can be offered in our legal system. Oklahoma Lawyers for Children has over 350 of the best attorneys and volunteers in Oklahoma County who donate their time and services to represent children. For more information, call 405-23-CHILD.
Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, helping to bring hope and love back to the lives of abused children.
Welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers, who's going to introduce our special guests.
We are pleased once again to have the two guests that were with us last week to talk about the details of the governor's tax program this week. On my left is Jim Walker, former chairman of the Oklahoma Tax Commission, a lawyer in Oklahoma City, and the chairman of the State Chamber of Commerce's Task Force on Taxation. Welcome back, Jim.
Thank you. Glad to be back.
And on my right, the Honorable Mike Hunter, Secretary of State of the State of Oklahoma. Glad to have Mike back for what is his third appearance with us. Mike is not only a lawyer, but he is also the governor's liaison to the legislature, and along with Tom Daxon, the point persons on this tax reform proposal. Mike, thanks for coming back.
Thank you.
We want to talk about details today. As Jim said last week, the devil is in the details. Well, neither of you are the devil, but we're going to get into the details and see if the devil's residing somewhere. If so, we'll try to smoke him or her out, as the case may be. I want to start out right off with a graphic. I want to look at a graphic on what services are going to be taxed, and I want to spend just a second looking at that. The services that are going to be taxed by this new tax that have not been taxed before, or at least in substantial part not been taxed before, will be general activities, and I've taken the liberty of kind of summarizing that as haircuts, car repairs, etc. There's a lot of categories that would go into general activities. And then a category of finance, insurance, and real estate, a category of construction, and finally a category of transportation, communication, and public utilities. Thanks for showing us that graphic. Now let's talk about the specifics. I want to start out with the general activities category, Mike. Tell us what's involved there, and as you do, as best you can, tell us why the decision was made to tax this as opposed to not taxing it.
Of course, the general design, Kent, is to tax all services, and that's where you begin the thought process. And if all services are taxed, obviously that rate is lower than the 5.9% that we have. Mm-hmm. So those that are included, as your graphic indicates, are general activities, which is a good description of stuff that is more pedestrian, haircuts, car repairs, if you get a plumber over to the house, which is a necessity sometimes, you're going to pay a tax on his labor as opposed to any materials he uses.
Now we've been in, let's take that plumber example just for a minute. Let's say we have a plumber come over and he or she performs $200 worth of work. $100 of it is for parts, $100 of it is for labor. I presume we would pay $4.50 or 4.5% on the parts, mm-hmm. and $5.90 or 5.9% on the labor.
Correct.
And the plumber would bill you accordingly. Is that
exactly
the way that's going to work?
Exactly.
Okay. Is there any was there given any consideration in the inclusion of some of these things, whether or not there's a differential in use of these services between what I will just loosely call the rich and the poor? Was that considered?
Well, it was considered, and you know, for most people, they're going to have to make a decision because not everybody's going to be for this. I mean, let's deal with that right out of the chute. But for most people, they're going to have more choices with respect to when and how they pay taxes. And they're going to have to do the math. I mean, they're going to have to look at where they are under current law, how much of an income tax they pay, and then do a quick look at their services in order to determine how a 5.9% assessment is going to impact their budget. And based on that, I think most people are going to conclude that this is a better thing for Oklahoma and a better thing for them.
Jim, what do you think?
Well, I think so too. Again, we've got to see more detail than we've seen on your plumber example, though.
Yes.
Those parts, you're going to get to pay a city sales tax on top of that $450 also. So don't forget that, where you would not pay that on the services portion, as I understand the plan now.
Well, let me interrupt you and expand on just what you added. Could a city come in and after this is enacted and enact a sales tax on the service itself, so that you're paying more than 5.9% on the labor? You're also, to the state, you're going to also pay a city sales tax on the labor as well.
I don't think they could without specific legislative authority to do that, and it's my understanding that would not be the proposal, and so they would be precluded if that becomes the law.
Okay. Are there any services in this general activity category that give you any trouble?
Well, I think defining the nature of the service, it's our understanding this will be retail services, in other words, the last customer, and that wholesale type services will not be taxed. Typically, sales tax goes to the retail transaction and not one upstream. There are a whole host of services that will be subject to this, as you mentioned, and the construction industry will be hit, whether it's the bricklayer or the carpenter or the plumber, on new construction, whether it be residential or commercial. That will all be impacted.
Well, let me stay with you a minute longer. I saw you quoted in a newspaper a week or so ago that the Oklahoma Tax Commission has 70,000 taxpayer or tax permits for collection sales tax now, and there's some expectation that that could jump to 700,000 with tax permits after this tax is enacted. Does that bring about any enforcement difficulties?
Well, I think it does. I mean, you've obviously greatly increased the number of taxpayers reporting in. Hopefully there would be electronic filing, which could help with that, but you're going to have an education problem because you're bringing into the taxing arena here for sales tax purposes a whole group of people who have not been in the business sector, who have not been paying or remitting a sales tax report in the past, and that was going to be an educational process.
Oh, Mike, is there going to be a shift in the size of state government? For instance, I assume that the tax commission would have to be restructured. What would be the shakedown of all that?
There'll be some transition challenges. I don't think there's any question about that. But again, the trade-off is going to be, after the transition's concluded, those folks that are spending a lot of time at the tax commission auditing and processing income tax returns, that function and that workforce will ultimately turn their attention to ensuring that the services tax is enforced and collected.
So just try a different type of work, probably, for the most part.
That's a good way to say it.
Yeah.
We're
got less than a minute to go here in this segment, Ken.
I'll make it short.
Okay.
I understand that in this last category of transportation, communication, public utilities is included water, sewer, and garbage. The state is going to be assessing a sales tax on garbage collection, water provision, and so on now?
Well, if services, again, some of these details do need to be worked out. Let's be clear on that.
Right.
But my understanding, one of the exemptions is intergovernmental services will not be taxed. So if it's a service that's being provided by the city, water, sewer, garbage, I don't believe that that's subject to the service tax.
Okay.
However, the provision of utility services will be subject to the service tax.
Okay. Let me jump in here and get us to a break. We'll be right back. We're discussing taxes, specifically Governor Keating's plan for tax reform. You're watching The Verdict.
Yeah, campfire's a lot of fun. You get to make some friends. You get to do some cool stuff. Campfire's for boys too, not just girls. But hey, campfire's definitely for kids. So call the campfire office nearest you to join in on the fun. 'Cause let's face it, you're not getting any younger.
St. Gregory's University has been changing the lives of people like me for 125 years. Affordable private Catholic education, balanced with dedication to community and service, makes St. Gregory special. We're extremely proud of our students' outstanding academic achievements and our nationally ranked athletic teams. It's when you help a student build a future of balance, integrity, and service that you change a life forever. St. Gregory's, a community for life.
Yesterday was plain awful.
You can say that again.
On Broadway is Oklahoma's premier youth musical theater company.
Bringing our daughter here was one of the smartest things we've ever done.
I've learned a lot. I've gained a lot of confidence. They helped me develop talents I never knew I had.
And it's fun.
On Broadway, Oklahoma's premier youth musical theater company. Now enrolling in Edmond. Call 330-CAST. That's 330-2278.
Every day, in state governments throughout the country, crucial decisions are being made that affect the lives of children and their families. But as this process takes place, children are often left voiceless. When these children raise their hands to be heard, is anyone listening? There are people listening. They are child advocates. Join us and raise your hand for kids.
Mick Cornett and Kent Myers back on The Verdict. We're discussing Oklahoma tax reform with Mike Hunter and Jim Walker. Kent, where are we?
I want to go back, not pull the graphic up again, but go back and ask Mike to give a comment or two about the finance, insurance, and real estate area of services. Just in a general, from a general perspective, what would be included in that?
This is a more difficult area because you're drawing lines between things that are more in the nature of a product than a service. For instance, in finance, interest wouldn't be taxed on your bank account if it's a savings account. But if there's a service charge, or if there are financial services that that the bank provides you, if you engage the bank on that basis, that would be taxed. Insurance, there's a limited piece of a premium that would be taxed, the commission piece of a premium. And real estate represents, I think, some issues to that particular industry because commissions would be taxed, as well as some of the services that are bundled in a real estate transaction. And it's our hope that when we write this law that we would make it clear that piece of the transaction, the services tax, could be moved into the amortization of the indebtedness when the property's purchased.
Well, that certainly responded to the question I had, but it raised another question with me. I am envisioning, based upon what you said, what will turn out to be probably a gigantic bill. Once all of what we're talking about here is put on paper, and are you envisioning quite a lengthy piece of legislation?
Well, it'll be a two-step process. The first step in this process, as we envision it, is that the legislature will agree to submit this question to the voters.
Yes.
And the general proposition will be, do you support these taxes being abolished and these taxes being put in their place? And we had a similar situation with tag fees and excise taxes on automobiles a couple of years ago.
And then if they vote yes at a vote of the people, whenever that might be held, then the legislature would be empowered to fill in the details.
Enabling legislation.
And when would it take effect, according to the plans that you now have?
That's actually something that has not been settled, and we expect that there'll be negotiations on that particular point, and that's actually part of this transition issue that we've talked about. I mean, clearly it's intended that it would go into effect at the beginning or the end of one of our fiscal years coming up.
Well, that is a procedure that's worked quite well in the past in Oklahoma. One qualification I haven't let the viewers know about Jim Walker is that he was chairman of the Able Commission. That's exactly what happened on liquor by the drink. The people were asked to vote, do you favor liquor by the drink or do you not? They said yes, and gave the legislature the power to create a system to manage what those laws ought to be and to empower the Able Commission. And by and large, I think the general consensus is that that's worked pretty well, that trusting the legislature in that context worked rather than the other. And I suppose that's what we're banking on here.
That is our fondest hope.
Yeah. Well, let's change the subject just a minute, and we've talked about what is going to be taxed. Let's look at a graphic on what is not going to be taxed. Services not taxed will be health services. I presume that's doctors, chiropractors, nurses, hospitals, etc. Oil and gas, education, and agriculture. Well, Mike, let's start first with the health exception. I think it may be self-evident why that's exempted, but would you tell our viewers why it is the governor thought that should not be taxed?
Two reasons. Virtually every Oklahoman is struggling with health care costs, and that continues to be one of the biggest challenges that policymakers have in Oklahoma and in the United States, how to get a handle on spiraling health costs. So it was the judgment of the folks who were around the table when this proposal was developed that it was not prudent to add an additional cost to what's already a challenge to Oklahomans.
What about prescription drugs? Are they taxed now with a sales tax?
I don't believe so.
And
I could be challenged on that.
Yeah, would they be within this health exception, or would they be?
Well, they would be a good.
That's a good, so that would.
So that they certainly wouldn't be taxed differently than they are now.
So our viewers don't need to worry about this proposal increasing the cost of their prescriptions.
Precisely.
Okay. Child care is, from what I've seen, will be taxed, and it seems to me that there are an awful lot of people that have to pay child care, single moms that have to work and have child care for their children. Was there any thought given to exempting child care from this proposal?
Well, that was an issue that we struggled with, and frankly, it's one that's probably out there on the perimeter of what was excluded and what wasn't. There is going to be a circuit breaker that is being developed that would exclude low-income Oklahomans.
And by circuit breaker, you mean that if they below a certain line on the income level, they're not going to have to pay this this service.
And that's being developed. So there'll be some relief. There'll be some relief from the services tax for those folks. Not all child care would be taxed. For instance, if your child care provider is an employee, if you set up the relationship that way.
And withholding and all that.
Right. That transaction wouldn't be taxed.
Okay. Oil and gas. Jim, what about the oil and gas exception either pleases you or displeases you?
Well, it pleases us because that's a very big piece of our economy, and a lot of our businesses are functioning in that area. And we would like to see that exception or exemption expanded broadly to include not only the wellhead and the oil field, but the transportation of that product, whether it be gas or oil, to some refinery point, and at some point it goes into interstate commerce, and I suppose at that point it's not taxable either. So it looks to me like the oil and gas exemption would be very broad by its very nature.
Education, Mike. Education is excluded. What do we mean by excluding that, and why is that excluded?
I think when you're trying to identify fundamental services that are out there that folks are going to need to access that
like tuition
are already a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
This would, I guess, fall into the same category as health care costs.
Mm-hmm.
Public schools, because it's a governmental service, would be excluded, and I think the judgment was made that all education services ought to be held harmless from the services tax.
Including private schools?
Correct.
Okay.
Got about 30 seconds left.
Agriculture. Jim, what's your thought about what the proposal does with regard to agriculture?
Well, again, it's one of our basic economies, and the business sector would like to see that one also broadly interpreted, not only on the farm itself, but the processing of those products that at least it occurs here in Oklahoma.
Final thought, Mike. Advertising, in or out, why?
It's out. First Amendment frailties make it very difficult to impose a tax on advertising.
And we're going to wrap it up there. Mr. Hunter, Mr. Walker, thank you both for coming by. Kent and I'll be back with some few friends, and we'll have some final thoughts when we return. You're watching The Verdict with Mick Cornett and Kent Myers.
Hello, my name is Ted Smith. I'm president of the board of directors of the Oklahoma Disability Law Center. ODLC provides free legal services in civil matters to people with physical and mental disabilities.
I'm Mike Sykes, Vice President of ODLC. For more information, call 1-800-880-7755.
The Oklahoma Disability Law Center provides high-quality legal services to people with physical and mental disabilities.
Boy Scouts of America, where above all else, character counts.
Bringing out the best in each student. That is the simple goal and tradition of Heritage Hall. The focus on the individual shapes the educational experience at Heritage Hall. Each student benefits from small classes, able, dedicated teachers, a solid academic curriculum, and exceptional co-curricular programs of athletics, arts, community service, and other activities. Parental involvement, personalized counseling, and the development of responsibility, integrity, and love of learning. If you want education taught with pride, then you want Heritage Hall.
And we are back on The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers, eroding any credibility we once had.
Well, we never had any, and if anybody ever thought we were stodgy, we've proved that they're wrong. We may be corny, but we're not stodgy. December 23rd, Merry Christmas to all of you on behalf of the Verdict family, and that's why we're here as we are. I want to take just a couple of minutes to introduce a few members of the Verdict family you haven't met before. On my right is our production manager, Chris Turner, the guy who makes sure everything gets done. And when it isn't done, the guy we always talk to. Chris, Merry Christmas to you and your family. On Mick's left immediately is Paula Brown, our producer. Paula is appropriately dressed in her red outfit today. She doesn't have a hat, but she doesn't need one because of her outfit. Paula makes arrangements with our guests, makes sure everything works as well as it does, which is usually marginal, but Paula, not because of Paula. on my far left is Larry Blankenship, our executive producer, and my colleague, partner, and good friend. Larry is the reason the Verdict's on the air. He's got his Christmas tie on and refused to wear a hat, but the executive producers don't wear hats. But this is, and by the way, in the control room is Mike Waters, our director. He couldn't come out here because he's, believe it or not, this is being directed somehow or another. And Mike joins all of us. Mick, this is the Verdict family. We wanted our viewers to see it. Finishes up as you usually do.
Well, it's a great idea for Kent, because it takes so many people to put on a television show, and so obviously there's a person behind the camera that's now being used. So we all consider them a member of our Verdict family, and we wish all of them a Merry Christmas. And we'd also like to thank you for being a viewer of this show for these past 9 months and a lot of shows ahead. For Kent Myers and the rest of our jolly old elves, I'm Mick Cornett. We'll see you next time on The Verdict.
This program was brought to you by Crow and Dunlevy, a professional corporation. And also brought to you by a friend of Oklahoma Lawyers for Children and Delta Dental Plan of Oklahoma.